Thank you, Ian. Well, this is about embedded systems in large numbers interacting using languages like JavaScript and Java, C++, and the like. These embedded systems are biologically, technologically hybrids. They're called humans. So in that title, if you actually apply good programming technique and factor that, there are actually a number of questions in there. I'm maintaining there is a new industrial revolution on its way, well, actually in full swing. We heard some about that yesterday, but I'll draw a parallel because I want to get to the question, does technology really change society? One should think it's the other way around, shouldn't one? Then I'm actually talking about a controlled society. What is that? What do I mean by that? And I'm contrasting that with not an open society, but with a creative society. What's a creative society? And actually, how do we get the one we want? Okay, so a little bit about me first. Ian has already said we work in the automotive sector in particular. This is the last edition of cars you can get without software. And as you can see, they're not accident-free. So some of our customers, something about me, well, we don't need that, but this is probably what characterizes me best. I'm actually a dreamer. I imagine things and say, why not? And I hope you join me on that journey this morning. So, is there a new industrial revolution? That was around just before the turn of the last century. This photo is from the late 1800s. It is a linen factory in Switzerland. We see something very typical. Industry exploiting the weak. Well, Marx had the theory that is to actually underpay labor power so that the profit could be made. We'll have to examine that. So this is what's supposed to be the new industrial revolution looks like if you were looking into the same building 120 years later. This is actually the Tesla factory. Do you see a human being? Yes, there is one, just rushing through the door there at the very top right. But they're obviously not relevant to the production. So let's look at the history of the Industrial Revolution and then put this last picture into perspective. So the first Industrial Revolution, that was late 1700s, early 1800s, was about water and steam power. It was the first, well, it rose out of mechanization, essentially. And the driving energies, if you like, was financial capital and physical human capital. It was still a lot of work, although the productivity was increased. The second Industrial Revolution, actually late 1800s, was using electric power. Here we have again, as the driver, the financial capital on which you want to make a gain. Financial capital, important rather than finance, because money is not worth anything until it is invested to produce added value. That's our economic theory today and has been for the past 200 years. Here we're getting now, rather than physical capital from the labor market, we're getting intellectual capital becoming much more important, the driver. The machines do the transport, the machines do the heavy lifting and pressing, but somebody has to think about what happens. IP, intellectual property rights, are on the rise. Actually, as a result of this, we also get lean production, and we get centralized networks, energy networks. A structure that we're now having difficulties to get rid of, this centralized network. Third industrial revolution, well, you can probably guess, it's the electronic one, and we're sort of seeing the tail of it. Financial capital, yes, as before. Intellectual capital becoming very important. And at the end of this electronic stage of the Industrial Revolution, we have internet, open source, becoming very important drivers of the technology. And they run slightly different to what the traditional industry ran like. The traditional industry was just replacing the feudal medieval hierarchy by a capitalist hierarchy, according to Marx, the struggle of the classes. But any economic theory will actually come up with such a hierarchy. And here we actually have, for the first time, the social capital inherent in human beings becoming very important. The social capital, the ability, the wish, the increase in value by working together, networked even across the globe, independent of an authority that drives that. So social capital, another form of human ability. So what is 4.0? Industry 4.0 in Europe is a fairly standardized term actually, and I'll try and give that definition based on this thing, which was the theme of all of yesterday, Internet of Things. I don't need to say anything about it anymore. It's more than machine-to-machine communication. It actually is, if applied to industry, so the industry of the Internet of Things, technology applied to the manufacturing process with its logistics. That is what is called Industry 4.0. The expectation is that we get an emergent behavior that will actually optimize the production and the logistics. Self-organized systems will arise. Well, if you give a system enough degrees of freedom, it will actually become more intelligent. There's actually a very good physics paper about that. If you want to look at Entropica. So the result of that would be this type of factory. These are the types of photos or photomontages if they don't exist. Well, this factory obviously exists. It's the Tesla factory here in California. And the factories, the production sites, the logistics only show machines, hardware. Well, software must be somewhere in there, but no humans. So what the definition says, Internet of Things and services applied to factory and logistics. Those of you who were at yesterday's keynote will note that the terms factory and logistics really were taken quite a beating in yesterday's talk. Actually, we have already today we're talking about prosumer. The consumer actually co-developing the product that he or she wants to use. So co-design we have already in existence. What we learned yesterday is that co-production or self-production based on on a 3D printing center or something like that is coming or already there. And that does mean, actually, we don't need no factory. If you don't need a factory, we don't need logistics. So these guys need help. Their factories are the third industrial revolution, but not the fourth. The fourth will be people working together closer, or at least on a network close, and you won't see the production. Okay, so if they got it wrong, we have to look at a different form of industrial revolution. So what really is the aspect that we're looking for? In order to answer that, well, so yes, there is an industrial revolution, and it's going to look quite different. Let's see what we have as impact of technology on society. Maybe we can grasp better what really the revolution is. So in answer to this question, does technology change society? I emphatically say yes. And actually, the very beginning of human development, of the development of human society, is the discovery and the shaping of tools. We are by our very nature actually cyborgs. We extend our physical abilities with tools, and we're the only living creature on this planet that actually modifies the tools based on experience to their needs. Now, this is a pretty early example. We can go a bit closer to today's times in looking at it. You see irrigation channels here. They came up in Sumerian times when the first cities were built about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. What they discovered is a way of irrigating the fields so that they had more predictable and better, larger crops. That meant they had to organize themselves to distribute the work. That meant that they had to organize sort of storage of the crops and which to be used for seeding next year and so on. So what did they need? They needed a written language, and so they invented one, cuneiform. Cuneiform, they're huge libraries that archaeologists have been excavating, but you wouldn't find much poetry written there. It's mainly log books and storage descriptions. So how many tons of wheat were stored by whom in what storage? So this is necessary to actually utilize the new agricultural technologies properly. So whenever we have a base technology, like this increase in agricultural technology and communication together, society makes a jump. So it's two technologies that interlink. And we can revisit that question a bit closer to today's time. Actually, we do another time trip, but this time to the Renaissance. That period in the Western world that actually created today's society. So I'm talking about the European Renaissance, about 1350 to 1550. It's slightly different depending on where you are, and some haven't experienced that today even. One of the greatest achievements in that time was the fact that they rediscovered how to present 3D on 2D. This is a painting by Leonardo da Vinci, actually one that he never finished. That's what I like about him. You can see work in progress. You see this painting would be constructed. It's actually a very geometric construction with the perspective of 3D mapped onto 2D. This is the first time, and they didn't apply that to architecture only. Only if you just look at Leonardo's diaries and sketchbooks, they could be modern drawing lessons of how to do what. And actually, that's what they were. Not only that they could be used by everybody, actually these artists did hold classes. They changed the education system, which was church-driven scholastic. Cities like Venice built complete new schools where these artists could teach the ordinary people. Well, ordinary people have to make an exception to that. Just like for democracy. Yeah? Democracy is the model of the Athenian democracy, while it was a democracy that held for 5% of the people living in Athens. All the slaves weren't counted, and women, of course, weren't counted either. Same here in the Renaissance. It was the upper third of the population, and not the whole lot. But we can get that right. So what have they done? They really have invented a horizontal technology that could be used to describe what is. There we have a skeleton. The architecture, so things could be built based on constructions. And this is the first drawing of a helicopter. Took a bit longer to get the first prototype built, but the first drawing was about 500 years ago. So what they built is a universal modeling language for the time. I'm not saying that you should build that into Eclipse just now, but maybe that would be useful. So a modeling language that describes what is, so nature could be analyzed, and experimentation could be goal-oriented, and describes what can be, construction, building. Now, this came actually together with the invention in printing. And it's not the printing as such that has existed, like woodcuts, but you had to carve the whole page. This was just movable letters, so you could reuse the elements. In essence, you got broadcasting. After the 100 years after the invention of this type of book printing, there were more books published than in the 1,000 years before that. And the cycles, the numbers are actually growing exponential till today, until Amazon invented a new marketing ploy for ebooks. Well, very important, what is often forgotten is that at the same time, cheap paper was invented, a cheap production with a simple process where actually paper manufacturing was spreading like wildfire across the whole of Western Europe. And pencil was invented. So what did we get? We got person-to-person communication. So the builder of a cathedral could actually really draw permanent notes for his students. Person-to-person communication. I could draw up indentures. I could draw up a contract on a sketch in the discussion between the Fuggers and Charles V when he was bankrupt and needed money from the trading faction. So the Renaissance laid the foundation for modern society and actually for the next 500 years of dominance of the world for the Western societies. And it is based on the notion of human-centric. Humans explore natural science by experimentative, and experiments now allowed the comparison with what is recorded through precise drawings that led to medical science, architecture. A complete new finance system was invented because the feudal system was really just based on property on land collapsed. Actually, talking about that, some of that is still there. Do you know that in England, 70% of the land is still owned by the 1% of population that derives from William the Conqueror? So talking about feudal times over? Not quite yet. Very strong competition between the trading factions and even between the artist schools. Competition is a very important factor. So Renaissance put man in the center. So I maintain politics does not change society. Society is changed by technology, and the politics follows. But we have to make sure it follows in the right direction. Very important here, artists change the technology. Who here is a developer? Any managers? Huh? Any artists? Good. Too few. You all need to become artists. Actually, you are, and I'll show you why. So the Renaissance laid a foundation for the modern society and for the dominance of the Western world. I don't want dominance of worlds, of parts of worlds over the others, but I want revitalized modern society. Because this is what the Renaissance provided. And then we ended up with another hierarchy as a result of the Industrial Revolution. Did something go wrong? Humanism? Education for all? What did go wrong? Do you think we live in a controlled society today? Who thinks we live in a controlled society? Who doesn't? Lots of abstentions. Well, actually, it was a bit unfair because I didn't tell you what I mean by that. What do I mean by a controlled society? So we have technological inventions that influence society, and in what direction do they influence society? So we first have to categorize what types of societies we might get. So this is what we think we would be agreeing to all are controlled societies. The behavior is controlled. The individual is not an individual anymore. The individual is, there's a German word, gleichgeschaltet. They all behave the same, have the same rights, but in particular, the same obligations. So here we have an attempt of a normal behaving system with a very widespread spectrum of activities, externally forced to behave on a narrow channel. Everybody behave very similar. External force, and I mean quite often in these regimes, force, physical. But we have to come back to that. We still have this type of understanding in when we look at today's industry. Now, this is 1936, a persiflage on what the role of man in production is. And actually, people need to be controlled. They need to be turned into machine. So we're away from human in the center to actually human being a cogwheel in the industrial process. It's the same statistical process control that's trying to be exercised on the work process. I've worked with this for a long time. It works as long as physical labor is concerned. As soon as there's just a bit of touch of intelligence required, of communication beyond when is the next break, and where is the lunch being, well, where the lunch can be bought. In the olden days, the laborers had to bring their own heating material and their own food, of course, to the work site. They might get drugs for that, but that's a separate issue. So why is man not in the center anymore? Because we don't trust him. Trust is good, somebody said. Control is better. So that's the maxim, actually, of still 95% of today's industry. Is that the way you work in Eclipse? Yes? Is Mike an authoritarian president? No? Well, maybe we have an island here. It's better. So capitalist society works on this principle. Who said that? Trust is good, control is better. Yeah? Actually, capitalist society works on Leninist principles. Interesting. But actually goes back further. People aren't trusted. So if we look at controlled society, we have to look at also the technology that is used for the control and whether we must be careful about using our control in the right way so that we can actually solve this question, how can we get the society we want? Maybe our technology actually favors the controlled side. Well, today I maintain we're witnessing a second renaissance. We're doing that technologically. We just need to make sure that we're doing it also in the society dimension and that we do it right. And are we getting it right? Let's look at the basics. Let's look at the technology. So what's today's universal modeling language? English. Software, yeah. And software is a modernized form of English. That's the definition. The first 3 lines is a definition of Lisp. So it's as far as you can get in the definition of software. So software can be defined very precisely. 3 lines of lots of indented, spurious brackets, parentheses, called Lisp. Yeah, software. If you compare to what I said before, yes, software not only describes what is and what can be, it goes one step further. You can now actually be performance artists. You can create things that haven't existed before, whereas the artists of the first Renaissance could only describe what is there and project what could be. Broadcast, yes, completely different. Actually, the first newspaper that was printed in New York in today's value would have had to have a startup capital injection of $30 million. Today, you can start with very much less to actually broadcast on the internet. Person-to-person communication, well, whilst it gets aggregated after the WhatsApp has been bought by Facebook, but it still is there. And M2M, which you, I think, agree now to call Internet of Things, are there. But more importantly, what we also learned yesterday, that these facilities are being democratized. So available everywhere, anytime, at very low cost. But why do we have then so much control? This is a parking lot on the German motorway. Weird, huh? More observation power than any airport would have had in the 60s. Yeah, we still believe people cannot be trusted. And that's why we don't want to see them in the factories. Is that the case? We really have got something wrong there. Have you ever seen machine actually add value? Our economy, capitalism, which is a very good system, has served us very well over the last 200 years, is actually based on adding value. And actually, the underlying theory is as well that money derived from speculation and interest is not added value, because it doesn't add to the goods and services, it just adds on the profit side. So it's about value creation. Have you seen machines create new value? It's always the human. This is why slowly, ever more, in the incremental revolutions, the human intellect and social abilities came up as capital that was needed for the Industrial Revolution. So they got it wrong. But actually, as a society, have we got it right? No, we haven't. We haven't. We're trying to be individualists, and we are still fighting being spied on in public. No, this is using the same Internet of Things technologies that we learned about yesterday. Yeah, so in order to get a target, everybody else needs to become a target too. Now, this is inherent in the observation technology. The point is, we are actually making it an issue because we add value to the data that is being collected. If we don't add value to the data that's being collected, nobody has power over us. We are being conned into some of the privacy schemes, and we buy the padlocks and give the keys to our observers. We have to think about that a bit more, but that's not the line of inquiry I want to continue. We are thinking that as individuals, we have created a modern society, and we have a value to this individualism. I would just want to state that individualism is not a guarantor for either an open nor a creative society. Actually, you know, has anyone been to Berlin? Have you been to Berlin? Have you visited the Holocaust Memorial? Who has? I can only recommend it. So this is from the outside. It's a field full of granite blocks. Imagine you go in with a whole busload full of other tourists, and suddenly you're inside with 200 other people who came in with you. And as you walk in, suddenly, whilst there are pathways everywhere, suddenly you're on your own. You're in a dense group of people, and suddenly you're isolated. And that's what this memorial is to symbolize. I recommend anybody coming to Berlin, you must see that and experience that. Towards the evening is probably the best time. And this relates to a quote that Charles Eket gave early part of the 20th century. For evil men to accomplish their purpose, it is only necessary for that good man should do nothing. And that's the danger of individualism. So this is why I think open society isn't enough. We need creative society. And creative society requires more of a glue of a cooperation between people. Stephen Hawking said, this is the century of complexity. We are We are working with systems, and we are working in a global system that is of orders of complexity that we've never seen before. Bifurcation is one property of such chaotic systems, that if you go beyond certain points, you actually get the system to oscillate between various possibilities, apparently for no good reason whatsoever. Cause and effect of the mechanistic Newtonian systems are gone. But all living systems, actually all systems with feedback loops, and therefore society and organizations, companies, actually are such systems. We can actually work within the system. This is the knowledge spiral of Takeuchi Nonaka. Actually, a lot of this is derived from the Second Industrial Revolution. The important point is that knowledge acquisition is a process that requires social interaction. It's the exchange between people. And that really only works well when, guess what? These people trust each other. If you don't trust and have no respect, then there is no learning. And this learning is necessary. This learning requires also to possibly change the rules. Because if you use the same rules all the time, you actually lose diversity. Change is the capacity for life. If there was no change, well, we'd still be in caves and waiting for the saber-toothed tiger to come. We wouldn't have invented bow and arrow because that would only be catastrophic for the environment. So we need rule makers and we need rule breakers in the same community to actually make progress. Yeah, but the rules, of course, should have a base. But first is diversity in contrast to the totalitarian societies that I showed you. Diversity is the potential of a society. The diversity is the potential even of any good high-performance team. And diversity respect of diversity is one of the key forces that defines an innovative organization, society, area. Who has heard of the works of Richard Florida? Richard Florida comes originally from Pittsburgh, a very heavy industrial area in the time of coal and steel. In decline ever since. Those of you who might come from there will pardon me saying that whilst the area has two of the top universities, the innovative companies don't stay there. Well, there is money around, but this is not as active. So the innovators, one would expect to go where the decision makers are and where all the money sits. But from an innovation perspective, Washington, D.C., which has the decision makers, is as dead as a dodo. Nothing there. What's the real innovative area? It's close to here, yeah. We're right in it. And other areas in the US would be Austin, Texas, for instance. So Richard Florida did an analysis of the areas. Why is there so much innovation in some areas and next to nothing in other areas? And they did that for the whole world. What was in Austin and what was in Silicon Valley in the 60s and 70s? The most vibrant hippie communities. What are they an indicator for? Diversity and tolerance. So he has three drivers in increasing importance for an area, a part of society, or an organization. You can apply it for any group of people. Three drivers that will actually make this innovative and keep it innovative. And that is creative. Technology. Well, you need to have the technology to be innovative in, or you have to invent one. Well, we've seen machines alone won't do, so you need people. You need the talent to do that. And most importantly, they themselves need to form and live within a community that has the tolerance for diversity, respect for the other opinion, acceptance of that. So that's the 3T theory, where tolerance is the most important one. And this is why the contrast to controlled society is the creative society. The creative society has tolerance. An open society doesn't necessarily have to be that tolerant. An open society could still be individualistic, and that put the own individual rights and perspectives over those of another, or at least neutral. And that means for innovative societies, innovative organizations, we have to accept to live on the edge of chaos. We will never have the final answer. We'll always discover something, and we will have quite quickly sort of come up with new rules of behavior. The surrounding always changes. So how do we get the society we want? Is open source a good model? It's not controlled. We had that earlier. There is an underlying system which is called meritocracy. But meritocracy can, if it's not checked, turn into oligarchy. So the domination of the rich or the super experts. But assuming that we actually have this rule breaker mentality in the community, so this can be adjusted. Connected and open. Well, connected across the globe, open to other opinions. That was actually the open society as proposed by Karl Popper. He had terrible difficulties in the late 40s to actually finding a publisher for his book, because he didn't just attack communism, he also attacked capitalism. Elinor Ostrom, for 40 years, she researched in communities. 2009, she got the Nobel Prize in Economics. And she came up with a number of rules that are necessary for communities to govern themselves. And guess what? There's a close match with the rules that hold for good, well-performing open source projects. And we have a third leg, and that is from neurology. We're actually wired to cooperate rather than compete. Well, compete in a way, compete with ideas, but competition and fight in terms of fighting, that's not really our part. It's actually society creates that behavior. Yeah? So be part of the Olympic Games. That's supposedly the top motivation. But if you're not bringing home any medals, you're nothing. Yeah? So society has created something in there that actually is deviating even from our basic economic engine. So capitalism works on two processes very closely interlinked. We produce something, consuming resources, funded by capital, and then there is another process that consumes those goods, and the consumption and sale of the goods returns profit. Now, so that's basically capitalism in one slide. Marxism could be the next slide, and that would say profit is derived from the exploitation of labor by paying less for the labor than it is actually worth. So you have Marxism and capitalism in 2 slides. I think this is good going. Huh? Let's introduce something else. Well, money. Not a new invention. Revitalized after the first Renaissance. Money is worth nothing, and there are some values behind that. Money can be printed by anybody. Well, actually not legally, but even, well, how would do 3D printers? It's okay, leave that speculation. Money can be capital to invest in creating something new, but money is not a value in its own right. What we've done with the economic cycle is we've mapped everything onto one form of capital. But we've already seen looking at the industrial revolutions that more forms of capital are actually involved in actually creating the revolution and creating the added value to society. When I talk about economy here, I always mean macroeconomics. I don't mean an individual small business. We have natural capital. We have natural capital, the resources that are there. Oil, for instance, water. Financial capital, we used that already in the previous part. Manufactured capital, that's what comes out of the production process, either in active or consumable capital. If it's labor capital, I mean the physical force that humans possess. Human capital, intellectual capital. Social capital, that's as far as we got. And what we need for the creative society, we actually need to learn to grow and invest in spiritual capital. Spiritual capital is that, coming from the Latin word spirit, that where the human spirit actually extends. That's the creative part. That is what allows us to go beyond man has ever been before, to invent something new, to create, to enrich society by new values. Spiritual Power, very good book. I highly recommend that, by Dana Sohar, a quantum physicist turned business advisor. Spiritual capital means acting from, so meaning, value, and purpose are the important things, not money. Value, meaning, purpose. Who has read the book Drive by Dan Pink? You need to do that. So add that, Ralph, add that to the homework list. Is open source a model? Well, I'm flashing a number of items here, and if that item agrees to your mode of working in Eclipse, then please raise your hand. Open? Yes, okay. Trust? Okay. Respect? Good. Diversity? Okay. Reflection? It's a bit less. Could improve. Renew. Renew means building new rules, for instance. Yep. There is service attitude, serve community. Yeah, good. So actually, if you try that, blank out open source, but try these terms in an ordinary company with the employees, and you will find considerably different answer to what I got here in the room. This is not representative. So how can we lead the change to a creative society? We need to learn how to accumulate spiritual capital. You are doing it. You're working in an open source project. The experience you have, you carry with you. With that, you carry expectations and behavior into other workplaces. You may infect your own company. You may infect somebody else. Yes, please do that. You can invest spiritual capital for the wider community. Spiritual capital is an ability of oneself to act in a creative capacity. You can also build organizations to reflect that. Open source projects have a model for that. But the rest of society is technology agnostic. That's okay. But they need to learn about the core principles that make open source work. So change leaders are wanted. I'm working with the Center for Spirituality, an open center for spirituality, to try and build a creative economy. Open source research, education, open society. These are projects that one can contribute to. So what have we discussed? Is there a new industrial revolution? Yes. Does technology really change society? Yes. But what do I mean by controlled society? We've looked at forms of controlled society, also the one that we creepingly have today, but we don't want that. What is a creative society? Yeah, we can reach it, but how can we get it? And this is really only up to you. You need to become these artists that paint the new world, the change leaders. Leader is not the people at the top. Leaders are those at the bottom who can help everybody else to find their own way. Everybody is a wave, and at some stage that can create a tsunami. The wave is the ocean. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Hans.